Hey sis, welcome to the Women Series podcast. I'm your host, Holly Sinclair. This is a show where period talk is celebrated, feminism is the driver, and fertility doesn't just equal baby making. Join me and my colleagues as we explore health, wellness, and womanhood. Welcome, Jess. Thank you for joining us on the TWS podcast this morning.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So I'm super pumped to get into today's conversation. You were just sort of mentioning before we hit record some of your history. So if you don't mind sharing, I might just get you to repeat that to the audience, just in regards to it's quite unique to meet somebody, I think, in this fertility space who has had the expertise of, OBGYN and has actually, in my opinion, seen the light and maybe moved over to more of this holistic alternative space. So yeah, I'd just love for you to talk to that.
Yes, thank you. So I am a physician assistant, and I spent 20 years in traditional conventional obstetrics and gynecology. And I did have a focus in the infertility space. I just had a natural draw in this area. And then I found that I myself had infertility issues and went through the journey myself. So my twins through assistance, and I didn't do IVF. I did take the medication, the pills that you can take to help you ovulate. I ended up pregnant after a while of trying with twins that are now 17. And at that point in time, I started seeing this increase in infertility. And I'm a very curious person as to why. So it was younger and younger and more prevalent. And I have a background in biochemistry prior to medicine. And I started looking into functional medicine, holism, which is basically looking at the entire whole person, systems biology, and looking at all of these parts that we call holistic medicine. So when I started working in that, what I found was I wasn't able to help enough people. I was seeing them after hours. The insurance doesn't cover that kind of care. And I was my partner and my kids were miserable that I wasn't home because I would stay after hours in the clinic to help people. So what I ended up doing is trying to figure out how can I help more people. So what I've done is I have now developed a holistic coaching service where we have a team of coaches that work in different areas of coaching. So we look at lifestyle, we look at nutrition and stress management, exercise, somatics, nervous system regulation, and some other areas as well. And so now we are serving in a group-based model as a team that comes forth to help people that are struggling with fertility challenges.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm glad that we'll definitely start with the nervous system conversation, because I really, working in fertility myself, it's such a core piece of it that is definitely not discussed through the Western model, especially if you're going through IVF. And I don't know I feel like you'll agree with me, but I definitely think there's a huge esoteric element to conception as well, right? Which, Western med will never accept because they can't scientifically explain that. But I always think that your soul is orbiting around you and it's just waiting for the right time to hit that physical realm. So I'd love to start with, the nervous system. I saw that as part of your program, Heart Math is involved.
Yes,
So can we start there? Because that is awesome. And I actually don't think I've ever spoken about Heart Math on the podcast before.
Oh, what is wonderful is we just did our hour-long intro training for our recorded sessions that aren't involved with our team. We have different tiers, and
Right.
so we are now rolling that out. And so I'm very fresh on this because we just recorded our training. So Heart Math, for people who don't know about Heart Math, is basically there's an app that you can put on your phone or a device, whether it's an Android or Apple, it doesn't matter. There's always an app for it. And it's a device that you can connect to your ear. And what it does is it has like a little mandala where you can, that increases in size and decreases in size. So it's mimicking breath. So it can show you how to breathe. And what we are in today's society is we're shallow breathers, and our breath and our nervous system are very much aligned. So when we're shallow breathing, it's very much more of a sign that we're in that stress state as opposed to the relaxed state. So you may have heard historically about the fight or flight versus rest and digest state. It's a little more complicated than that now that we follow polyvagal theory, which I'm sure we can also talk about. But at this point in time, if we just look at that, what are we going to be in when we're shallow breathing? We're going to be in more of that stress state. And what we can do with our nervous system is actually we can it's a biofeedback mechanism where we can get our body back into rest and digest simply by training our breath.
Mm.
And so it's really important that we learn how to breathe almost first. So we do it very early in our program and highly recommend people look into heart math. So what we do is we start with that breathing technique. And it's we have some, breathing into your heart space, getting yourself out of your head and into your heart. And that actually can help your nervous system get back into that rest, digest, and procreate state.
Mm.
And that's one thing we can train ourselves. So we have our men and women both do this so that we can optimize our fertility on both ends. So it's really important when we have that breathing and when we have a device, especially for people who want metrics. Because one thing I have learned being from a conventional medicine space is what have we done in conventional medicine? We learn everything based on a test result. Test result says this, it says A, then we do B to get the result C. So when we go into holism and we go into holistic medicine, there aren't as many metrics because it's a different kind uh,
Subjective.
structure. Yeah, it's more subjective. How do we feel? How do we
Mm.
feel in results? So it's really important, I find, especially in this fertility space, to be able to say we have a milestone. HeartMath gives us those milestones because when we have it on our device, we can follow our progress and see we're making progress and we have success. And
Mm.
that's exceptionally important.
Yeah, Greg Braden is a pretty interesting
Mm.
guy who is the creator of HeartMath. I honestly, it's been so many years that I haven't even read about HeartMath. I feel like I learned about it a long time ago and then it kind of left my vortex. But when I saw
Yeah.
it on your website, I was like, oh, we need to touch on that. And I think also to your point, you spoke just then about like that person, the client getting back into their heart space.
Mm.
But we really forget in the fertility world, like there's that relationship of the couple. And often that has a lot of strain associated with it when they've been trying for 6, 12, 18 months, like, so allowing them just to like get back into their heart center for their relationship's sake can be so critical to allowing that baby to come through. Anyway, that's
Holly, I love that you
yeah.
say that because that's part of the reason we have both partners
Mm.
doing heart math so they can recenter and not be as stressed. Because as soon as we find out, I mean, I was there, as soon as we find out that we're having fertility struggles, so much can come into play. First of all, sex isn't for fun. Sex is for a purpose. So we lose some of that erotic space. And then we can look at our partner and say, do I really want to do this with them? There's a
Mm.
lot of shame associated with fertility, especially if there's a male factor. And now up to 40% of fertility has a male factor component to it. That doesn't mean there isn't a female factor, but there is most definitely a male factor. And men feel more shame in this space than women do, but it doesn't mean that we don't. So it ends up being this battle. So with heart math, we can help you breathe to get in this space and other things we recommend. So we teach intro to tantra. And
Mm.
so we
Cool.
teach eye gazing. Yeah. So a large component, our two largest components are nervous system regulation at a conscious, subconscious, and unconscious level. One component is heart math, and the other is very much a relationship component. So
Mm.
we teach imago dialogue. So maybe with your followers, we could put a link to an imago dialogue, nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's work. So we literally have scripts we print out and we make it fun and we have you can it's so hard and challenging when you first learn how to have a conversation where you're trying to say this is how I feel without triggering your partner into them feeling like they're that we we don't want them to feel that we are accusing them. You are making me feel this way. But that's how much of what comes across, whether we're in the infertility space or otherwise. And so this way of communicating with our partner to say, I'm feeling a certain kind of way. Can you hold space for me? Can you just hold me? Or I'm feeling sad, and understanding how our partner should respond to us is a conversation. You know, we hear a lot about men are fixers, right? Well, maybe you shouldn't do that way then. We don't want to hear that, darling. Thank you so much for the advice, but, please, if I could just share this with you, and I just need to be seen and heard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so much of that relationship piece. And then when we can build that relationship and then have that peaceful space within the home, we want to be home. We want to rush home. We want that safety of those four walls with the person that we're starting a family with, where we can have that conversation and communication. It is us. It's our partnership that is necessary in order to grow this family. We know that babies are disruptive. We want them badly, but my goodness, are they disruptive to your life and your lifestyle? So it's important at this stage to be able to have that relationship work before the baby shows up.
I say this a lot to clients because I only work in the TTC space. I don't, once people get pregnant, I'm gone. But it's like, if you don't have a healthy, strong relationship prior to becoming parents, and now I can say this from experience, it's going to really test you once that child is here, because I'm someone who does have a very healthy relationship with my husband, and even he and we've had more disagreements since my son's been born than ever in our 10-year relationship, just because, you would understand, you're a mum. It's just like, it's so challenging, especially when they get to toddler years and you're like, your own childhood wounds are starting to pop up and you're like, so I think it's so good to have those foundational tools to lean back on, like what you were just talking about in regards to the relationship exercises that you offer clients. And we also know that, like, from a scientific standpoint, they've shown that with couples who go through IVF, if they have sex after a transfer, they have a higher chance of conceiving. Right. So, and I think that has to do with the seminal
Oxytocin.
Probably oxytocin.
I bet you it's an oxytocin cortisol,
Yeah.
because when it comes to orgasm and when it comes to connectivity and intimacy, there's an oxytocin cortisol balance that is healthier than when there isn't intimacy. So the cortisol, so we can still release oxytocin with stress, but the cortisol oxytocin ratio is not conducive to healthy sex hormone balance for conception. But when it's related to orgasm, more for women than for men, and intimacy, then it has a healthier ratio of oxytocin and cortisol when it comes to conception and sex hormones.
That's interesting, because there's another research paper, not to sort of derail this conversation because I want to come back to the nervous system stuff, but where they know that if a woman orgasms, if they're trying naturally, if she orgasms, she has a higher rate of conception as well. And it's almost like the cervix kind of like pulls the sperm up at a faster rate. And again, that probably has to do with oxytocin.
My guess is because it's also a rebound. There was, and I want to be cautious because I don't remember this exactly on the study, but the rebound on cortisol resolution is, I think, faster. I don't want to get this wrong. I just want to say the ratio. So after orgasm, it's a better balance for oxytocin cortisol when it comes to what I would anticipate to be a good hormonal balance for conception. It's not direct relation to conception, but it's when I looked at the study, I thought, oh, this makes perfect sense when I'm watching that, this is a circadian rhythm for cortisol, right? So when I'm looking at how cortisol is fluctuating, that makes great sense.
I mean, nature didn't get it wrong.
No, nature did not get it wrong. That is true.
So but back to the nervous system stuff, because one thing I've seen you speak about, which I'd love for you to touch on, is the baby block.
Yes.
Now, what is the baby block?
Okay, so we have a little bit of a controversial video out there on Baby Block, and I think that's what you're talking about,
Probably.
where basically, yeah, where it was, and it's hard because I wish that was a 20-minute interview that ended up in a less than a minute clip.
Mm.
So when we talk about baby blocks, what I want to caution us from, because we are all those of us that struggled with fertility, when people say, if you just relax, it'll happen. There is nothing worse to say to someone than if you just relax, it'll happen. That is not the same as a baby block. So baby blocks are subconscious blocks in our mind that basically change our biochemistry so that we aren't having a good balance in our hormones. But it seems it's a subclinical change. But all of these changes we see are subclinical, especially in our unexplained infertility group, which can be as high as 49% of our infertility crowd.
Wow,
So
49%. I didn't know
as
that.
high as, and they say
Wow.
hormonal, I'm putting that in air quotes because we don't exactly, because we can look like we have a normal range and we go in and we get tested and everyone says everything is fine, keep trying. We can have our normal 28-day cycles. Oh, everything is fine, just keep trying. But it's actually a subclinical issue. So baby blocks, to get back to that, is a reference back to actually our hypnotherapy program, which is what we do, which is where we go in on a subconscious level and we break down baby blocks, which can be a couple of examples. And it can be, this can be a hard thing. So I just want one more disclaimer of, I'm not saying that having these baby blocks uh, are a make it or break it.
Mm.
And when talking about baby blocks, it's important to understand that what we're saying is some of the stories we tell ourselves at a very deep level subconsciously can be impactful. So to be kind to ourselves when we come across a baby block and understand that we can find resolution to these baby blocks. So some of them are as deep as guilt of being on birth control pills for, 15 years and then going off of birth control and then finding out you're not ovulating and feeling like you did something to your body.
Mm.
So that's an example of a baby block. Or if somebody had terminated a pregnancy at one point in time, that is a very big baby block. And in clinical practice, I can't tell you how many times if I knew somebody had terminated a pregnancy and then they were trying and couldn't conceive, that they would come in and I would look them straight in the eye and say, you did nothing wrong. This is not what caused you to have trouble now.
Mm.
And everybody bursts into tears. And it's just one of those things, if people find out that they're struggling with conception, if they did terminate a pregnancy, they say, God is punishing me, or something along those lines, whatever their belief system may be, karma, whatever it would be, they say to themselves, this is a problem. And that can actually have a biochemical reaction in our body. So those are some examples of baby blocks. Then we have other examples of baby blocks that are really, really reasonable too, which are, I'm in love with my partner, with my husband, and I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to have, a baby's going to interfere in our relationship. I promise you a baby's going to interfere in your relationship, but that's one of those baby blocks as well. So there are a lot of different baby blocks, and these are the things we're talking about, not those are examples. So when it comes to, and I'm a big believer in hypnotherapy for assistance with conception, because remember, when it comes to nervous system regulation, there are things that we know of that are stressors that are impactful to us, like finding out that we didn't get pregnant this month, having input from loved ones that we don't want, having input from
Mm.
our partner that makes us feel off, our own personal guilt and shame, let alone other stressors in our life. Like I have a deadline at work that I need to meet, or how am I going to, manage juggling all the balls that I have in the air. All of these things are stressors we feel. Then we have stressors we don't feel. And that goes back to what you were mentioning about childhood wounds and all of that inner child work. These are things that can nag at us at a level that we don't feel or that we're so used to because they've been around our entire lives. And so they're just a little chatter in the back of our mind. So those are things we're not aware of. We don't see that they're present. And hypnotherapy is beautiful to be able to address those things that aren't right in our conscious mind.
Mm.
So helping at that level, every little bit helps. So when we get into those baby blocks and address them, it can be very impactful in our fertility.
And also, surely addressing the, like, whether it's, we want to call it trauma, childhood stuff, whatever, but addressing that has a huge, even if it's not necessarily a baby block, has a huge carryover to the health of your pregnancy, to the health of your child's nervous system, to how they handle stress when they become children. You know, you mentioned earlier the polyvagal theory, and we know like a mother's vagal tone directly impacts the child's vagal tone. So
Yes.
surely doing all of that nervous system regulation work prior to conception, regardless of if it's impacting baby blocks or not, is so critical.
Absolutely. Yes. And I love what you say about mom's vagal tone impacting baby's vagal tone. When we think about conception and getting pregnant, it almost sounds flippant the way we say this, but getting pregnant can be the easy part.
Mm.
Keeping your body in a nice balanced harmony. Think about, where do you want that baby to grow? We want that baby to grow in a nice, calm, peaceful womb, right? Somewhere where we aren't introducing so many stressors or ups and downs and volatility. And so learning things like heart math, doing that in the morning, at night, or even a couple of times a day. Once you learn heart math, once you're in that zone, after 3 months, you're really in a good space where you don't even necessarily need your device. You can have your device, but you can do this anywhere. And that can be a nice, peaceful way to be able to get you back into good vagal tone as well.
Mm.
So, but back to the childhood traumas, we don't do trauma work, but we work with a lot of trauma therapists because our program doesn't work with trauma therapy. But yes, and even trauma with a little t, we call that,
Mm.
things that no one has a perfect childhood. There's always something. There's always something. And it doesn't mean we need to be in a victim mentality. Quite the contrary. When we can gently look at our own selves and see, where did we come from? It can be so helpful. So I use the example of, I think about my own son, and he was my little helper in the kitchen when he was little. And I have a recollection of him walking towards the stove really fast and me just, don't touch the stove, which startled him. Okay. He retracted. So what am I doing? I am saying, oh my gosh, I need my baby to be safe.
Mm.
And what he is hearing is, I just did something bad. I'm bad. I'm bad. I'm bad.
Let's take a quick break from this knowledge bomb episode. If you're enjoying the podcast and want to find more information on how to become your most fertile self, make sure you head to thewomenseries.com and check out my full access membership. Or if you want something a little less committal, have a look at the Free Range Fertility Summit, a once-off download where 8 experts in fertility speak on topics such as preconception care right through to postpartum. You can find more information on this in the show notes. And now, back to the show.
So it doesn't even have to be a trauma with a big T. It can be a trauma with a little t, where all of a sudden he's feeling like, okay, and that automatically turns into shame. It's how we're built. It's how we're built. How we learn what is right and wrong. And so I still remember this. And now in working with polyvagal theory and working with attachment styles and communication styles, now I'm looking at this and saying, wow, how many times? But we can't get on ourselves for it. We're all going to do this in protecting our children, ourselves, our partner, our loved ones, our sister, our brother, our mom, anyone in our best friend. We all can get into this space where we react in a certain way, where it may not be received in a productive manner. So when we balance our nervous system and do all of this work like heart math, we tend to learn how to respond instead of react. So instead of screaming, don't touch the stove, I may have been able to, if I was in that healed space back then, find a better way, find a better way to interact, even though he's a fast mover. He was a fast
And
kid.
they're so fast at that
They're
age as
so
well.
fast. They're so fast.
Like,
But I would hope. And so now basically, you're never too late is the other thing. We're never too late. So we start where we are. I'm sure you probably have some listeners who already have some children and that are bringing in their next and trying for their next. I know I have those as well. We're never too late. We're never too late to start learning.
you can go so deep with it, can't you? The nervous system stuff. I feel like it's an absolute rabbit hole. There's an amazing book by a guy called Mark Wolin called It Didn't Start With You. I think that's what the title is called. Have you read that book?
I think I haven't read it, but I think it's on my list.
It's basically,
he's
a psychiatrist, and long story cut short, not to plug Mark, but he highlights how epigenetic trauma impacts people.
Yes.
And it's like, you can just go so deep with this stuff that you can become overwhelming. But I think, to your point, learning heart math, learning exercises where it's like, we're not going like extremely deep all the time, but we're just getting your nervous system to a point where you're regulated, you're calm, you're learning to respond, as you say. And that has huge carryover to whether you're TTC right through to when you become a parent. So anyway, I'll leave that part of our conversation there. Thank you for sharing that. But I'm really glad that we sort of just dove into that slightly, because it's such a big piece that really never gets looked at, especially if you're going through the IVF journey.
So much. And that's why one of the other reasons we work with IVF clinics, it's so clinical and
clinical,
and it's, invasive procedures, and it's algorithmic, and it has to be. I mean, so I was conventional medicine a long time. It has to be algorithmic. They know the science that it works with. The doctors that are working in this field are brilliant. They're in that space where they know what has to happen next. And the very good ones that are very curious are always looking for that next step. How can we do it better? Because now it's taking 3 to 6 cycles. So the really curious ones are working with groups like mine, because they can hand off. They don't want to learn the holism aspect, but they are aware that when you involve the holism aspect with IVF, they have higher success rates sooner. So it's really good to be able to work hand in hand. I'll never point a finger at convention, and there's a space for everyone wherever we may be. For sure. So it is very, very important.
For sure. And I just keep thinking, like, just to finish off the nervous system piece, even if you're going through IVF, you just think like how much impact that's having on your womb and your womb space to be poked and prodded and injected. And, so like there is that esoteric, like, I don't know, quantum space that we need to honor, even if you're going through that conventional model. But anyway, moving into the conventional model and some statistics around that, I would love just to hear your thoughts around what do you think is going on with fertility in general? Like, why are we at a point in Australia, it's 1 in 6 couples, I don't know what it is in the States, that are using IVF. Why are we here? Like, what's happening?
Yeah, it's we're at 19%.
Wow.
Fertility that's infertility. So 19%. And so we're 1 in 5, yes. So my take on this is we are facing this massive amount of, actually, I think nervous system is number one. Number one. But it is how we're living our lives now in this world. And so it kind of sneaks up on you. But ever since I don't know what nutrition is like there. It's really horrible here. Like even the school lunches. I mean, they can call a fruit roll up a serving of fruit. I mean, there are just so many aspects. Nutrition is also a big important factor. Actually, I want to go back to the nervous system for a second. I know this is simply because it is number one for me. So when we think about, so overall, to answer your question, It is that we are living an unhealthy lifestyle, and there is something called allostatic load. So let me explain that to you. Allostatic load is basically the tipping point of a scale between health and unhealth. Okay. And so basically, if you think about diabetes, for example, when we think about conventional medicine, that allostatic load would be measured with glucose or hemoglobin A1C. And it would be at a certain point, you would be diagnosed. Okay. When we are looking at something like fertility or any kind of syndrome, which syndromes are collections of symptoms like PCOS, the allostatic load is how many factors of unhealth are there before you tip the scale where you are no longer capable of conception. Okay. So we're just going to use conception as this. So we have detoxification, for example. So we have mitochondria in every cell, and it's important that our mitochondria make ATP. ATP is the energy of the cell that is needed in high concentration for healthy egg and healthy sperm development. Okay. So if our mitochondria, so what happens is within the mitochondria, we make this energy particle. Let's just use one example. If we don't have enough magnesium, when we make our energy particle, then if we don't have a magnesium to stabilize it and hold it together, it will dissipate into its pieces. So a large percentage of the population, I think it's 80 some odd percent of the population has a magnesium deficiency. So everybody who is trying should be on a high quality magnesium, either usually glycinate. I'm a big 3 and 8 fan because it crosses the blood-brain barrier and it helps with mood, and it helps with some genetics. Nervous system, and it also helps with COMTs. If you have any, people that are doing MTHFR or COMTs, if you have a slow COMT, it can actually increase the rate of COMT, and it can also help detox your estrogen. So that's why I like 3 and 8. So let's go back to ATP. All of these different components that we need, like our B vitamins, and we need L-carnitine, and I know that meat can be controversial. Some people are meat eaters, some are not, but L-carnitine is from meat. It is not it's a partially essential amino acid. So you could get it made by other amino acids, but the best way to get L-carnitine is through meat sources, meat, fish, chicken, poultry. And that is needed to make ATP as well. So there's our nutrition component. We are not eating the nutrition that we need to be able to make the appropriate components. Also, say mitochondria in that machine that we are using to make ATP, we end up making reactive oxygen species, which are basically gunk up the machinery, which is a toxin in our body. So we're just going to call it generally a toxin. If we don't remove those or eradicate them as much, then our machinery doesn't work well to make the energy that we need to be able to conceive. And that's not just energy for egg and sperm health, it's energy for function. It's energy for brain function. It's energy for all of our function. It is our energy molecule. And so there's a lot of components in our allostatic load that has a nutrition component. So we look at nutrition, we look at stress, we'll talk nervous system last. We look at the right way, because that'll be our most, the right way to exercise. When we over-exercise, we tip the scales in a poor way. When we under-exercise, we tip the scales in a poor way. So there's a sweet spot in the middle. When we talk about relationships, there was a great study that I just read, came out in November of this year, about, this wasn't fertility, but it was couples. Happy couples, when we live in a home, we end up with the same gut microbiome as our partner for the most part. And happy couples have healthier microbiomes. They measured, I think, in their 80s or so. There was a big study that was done. It's beautiful. So if we are happier with our couple, we have a healthier microbiome. Our microbiome in our GI tract is important for allostatic load because we have we have about 60 different healthy bacteria that help with hormone balance in our gut. And then it's also important for detoxification of our hormones when they are imbalanced is in our gut as well. So all of this comes back to our allostatic load. So that's nutrition, stress, relationships, exercise, sleep. We don't get appropriate sleep at the right time, that can impact our cortisol, and that can also impact our, if we have high cortisol, we can have low progesterone as women, low testosterone as men, and that is not conducive for our healthy balance. So all of these things weigh for our allostatic load. So when we're looking at, okay, I'm not getting 8 hours of sleep at night because I'm running around and I have to work this extra job because I can't pay my bills, so my stress is high, and I can't eat proper nutrition because I can't afford it, all of that is tipping the scale. So all of those little tiny aspects, which are actually big, it's how we live our lives, are what are causing this increase in infertility. And I'm fairly comfortable standing by that. I'm not standing on studies. I have a large lecture that we're putting together right now that we're going to get out there about different aspects of importance that have studies behind them for people
Mhm.
who need the studies. But the truth is, allostatic load works for any kind of disorder that we see. And it makes a lot of sense. So, nervous system, when we are experiencing stress like that, it impacts, let's just go back to our GI tract. So when we are in that stress space where we're highly stressed, when we talk about fight or flight, and the typical example of historically, it would be in fight or flight to run from the saber-toothed tiger, but then you would get to your safe space and then you would get back into rest and digest mode. So we were having moments of fight or flight, but we live in a pretty chronic fight or flight state at this point in time. So when we're in that space, our digestion slows down. We don't have appropriate stomach acid for digestion. And when that's the case, we can't digest our food down into the appropriate size to be micronutrients for absorption so that we can have appropriate balance for health, for fertility. When that happens, we end up without digesting our food as well, and then we can end up with putrefaction in the gut, and it doesn't digest well, which can cause an imbalance in our GI tract, imbalance in our microbiome, can lead to a lot of issues within our stomach as well. And I'm sure that your people know about this as well. I'm sure you work with gut and microbiome a lot. So, and we can't have the appropriate digestive enzymes released because we don't have an appropriate concentration of stomach acid to be able to trigger that release.
Mm.
So we aren't even in a space where we're going to be able to get everything absorbed, even if we have good nutrition. So that's why, for me, nervous system comes before nutrition, because I can give you all of the nutritious food there is. But if I don't have your nervous system well regulated, you're not going to be able to digest well enough to be able to have the appropriate nutrients to have appropriate health for egg and sperm.
I wholeheartedly love everything that you just said. I'm like hoping I can capture all of that in a nice little reel. But so there's a couple of things. So bioenergetics,
Yes.
massive. What you're talking about with ATP is so disregarded specifically in the fertility space. As I say to my clients all the time, you're trying to make a child out of your own cells, right? Like, so energy production is critical. So bioenergetics, but also what you're saying in regards to the nervous system, and I'm presuming obviously the parasympathetic nervous system. So many times that I've worked with people with chronic health issues, and they've seen multiple people by the time they get to me. They've done all the gut protocols, and yeah, sure, they kind of got better after a protocol, but now it's back to the same, and they're low FODMAP, they're paleo, like they're AIP, right? And I always say to them, yeah, because your nervous system's fucked.
Right. That's
Like,
exactly
to put it
right.
bluntly, because
That's it.
your parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for digestion. So no matter how many gut protocols you do, unless your PNS is in a position where it feels safe, you will continue to have these chronic gut issues. So what you're saying, I'm so thankful that you've said that, because it is something that I feel in this, especially in this functional medicine space, people can get very, I don't know, they kind of get into their like little silos of being the gut person or being the ATP person, but it's actually multifactorial and everything is working together.
Yeah, we have a beautiful diagram that has a person in the middle and all of our different factors with interconnectedness of systems. And when you look at how they can ping pong around, and we spend a lot of time talking about inputs and outputs. And I think one thing that's also really important, especially while we're talking about allostatic load, is understand when you do something good for your body, you're also not doing something bad for your body. So it has a double effect. So when we look at putting in a cheeseburger. I'm trying to think of something. Gluten. I'm going to go with gluten. A piece of
Yeah.
toast, because we do gluten free. We
Yeah.
do an anti-inflammatory program. Everybody gets to win, but we fill it full of appropriate nutrients for pregnancy. So it's very modified. It's a very modified plan. So let's say we have a piece of gluten-filled toast and we put that in. It's taking the place of something that could be healthier for you, which, make it a salad with, vegetables in it and maybe some chickpeas and everything, a nice vinaigrette, and put some chicken on top or salmon or whatever you choose. And then when you're still filling up because you're still hungry, but one of them is doing right by you and one of them is doing wrong by you. It's not even, it's a double effect. So when you're putting the gluten bread in, you're also not getting the nutrients. But when you're putting that salad in, you're also not getting the inflammatory gluten. So everything we do has a double effect. And I think it's important when people are making these changes because they are hard changes to make. And we will never say they're not. Never. So we know. So know you're having a double effect. Not only are you doing something right by you, you're not doing something wrong by you. Give yourself 2 pats on the back, not just one.
There is a lot of resistance there, though, isn't there, when you try to implement some of especially these dietary changes with people. I mean, so many people that could take 20 supplements a day.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we do both.
Yeah.
We do both because with pregnancy, you need to have the reserves. And so many people are depleted that we give you a nutrition plan and we talk about what extra additional supplements you should have. It's just with pregnancy, not necessarily for other things, but when you're trying to conceive, you really need those reserves. Because the way I always put it is your baby's your parasite. Your baby is your and I'm saying this now, be ready. And we talked about everybody you walk in, first day, you're called mom and you're called dad.
Yeah.
It's going to
Wow.
happen. You're going to get there. We know you're
Yeah.
going to get there. Our success rates are really, really high. We know you're going to get there. It's not about that. It's your baby's your parasite. We're like, but we'll give examples, where for our pregnancy program, we have a couple there, everyone talks a lot about, and I know this isn't your population, so we won't talk about it for long, but can you sleep on your stomach or on your
Oh,
back?
yeah.
Oh, and you sleep on your back. And so I talk about alpha hemoglobin and how your baby is your parasite and will steal magnetic pull of oxygen away from you to that baby is so strong. Now, of course, there are times when you shouldn't be sleeping on your back, but the worry and the nervous system dysregulation you have from the worry is what concerns me. So let me give you some knowledge about how your baby is your parasite and your body will suffer and your baby's going to be just fine. But we do need
Totally.
those reserves. We need those
Totally.
reserves for
What
sure.
are some of those? Because I agree, I supplement all of my fertility clients. What are some of those like critical supplements that you lean on? I mean, there's an individualized approach, definitely, but I feel like there's probably 2 or 3 in there that
Yeah,
are
for
universal.
everyone. So
Yeah.
we have a methylated prenatal vitamin, which is split up in 5 different pills that are spaced out throughout the day so that you can actually absorb them. And you have them with your meals. I don't say on an empty stomach ever for vitamins, ever. A high quality fish oil that is batch tested and definitely mercury free. So really high quality fish oil, as I don't want any heavy metals anywhere near it. And then CoQ10, you can do ubiquinol, CoQ10, whichever you choose, but we'll change the dosage of it. And a very high quality probiotic. I like to focus a probiotic on 2 factors. One, when you're trying to conceive, looking at balance for hormonal balance and for fertility. And the other one is for vaginal microbiome. Because we inoculate our vaginal microbiome from our GI microbiome. And so I am a big supporter of trying to free eradicate GBS, group beta strep, which is something that can be present while you're pregnant, and then you end up on antibiotics in labor, or baby can get sick. And so there are some probiotics that have some great data behind them as potential for decreasing the risk for GBS. And so I make sure those are in our probiotic as well.
Amazing. Yeah, and we know as well, like the seminal and egg microbiome play a critical role in that beginning phase of life. And like, there's some research that talks about how it's actually the seminal microbiome that allows the sperm to penetrate the egg. And that's why success rates with IVF are lower, because they wash the semen off the sperm. And so they don't have that microbiome there. So, focusing on your microbiome is really, really important. So I'm glad you're bringing that up, but particularly the vaginal microbiome as well. Do you see, I'm presuming you have clients that have a lot of those reproductive health issues, like maybe endometriosis or polycystic ovarian syndrome. Do you see them needing some of these things we're just talking about to help get them into an easier conception journey?
Yes, without a doubt. I mean, I think that the majority of what we see are unexplained, but that might just be subclinical endometriosis.
Totally.
Somebody that doesn't have pain, or subclinical PCOS. I mean, that 49% are people that just didn't have their hormones in that range. It doesn't mean you're not on your way. Totally. So we might have caught you before then. And so absolutely. So it's similar protocols with some caveats to that, because as you know, there are some opposites when it comes to supplements. Like if you are diminished ovarian reserve versus PCOS, there are some opposites that you don't want them to take. So it's really important to know where your person is on that journey and get some history on that and to go from there. But yeah, most definitely we see it a lot. And some of what we do, as I'm sure some of what you do, is also it's the holism of it, the lifestyle modification helps with, so those are estrogen dominant states, right? Endometriosis and PCOS and fibroids, PMDD, these different diagnoses. So in the functional medicine world, holistic world, we call it estrogen dominance, which may be a little bit of a misnomer, but it is a way that we can describe it to say, okay, we need to make sure that we are looking at your estrogen detoxification system.
If you'd like to keep listening to this episode, please head over to Patreon, where for $5 a month, you get unlimited access. You can also find full access to the podcast, as well as my courses, multiple webinars, and ebooks at thewomenseries.com. As always, please remember this podcast is for informational purposes only. You should seek professional advice for any health-related issues. Thank you for supporting me and my desire to make all women healthy, fertile, and whole.